Hello and welcome to Beyond Business, where we look at competition in the global economy. There are two giants of the literary world, and millions of euros are at stake. In this show, we're comparing the merits of France's Prix Goncourt with Britain's Man Booker Prize. Both are handed out annually, and they usually lead to instant fame and a bump in book sales for the authors who win. But there's criticism of how the Prix Goncourt in particular is awarded. There are accusations the race is rigged in a few publishers' favour.
The Paris Book Fair, one of the largest such events in the world. 4 days, more than 3,000 writers, and over 500 meetings. France is a fitting host. Last year, the country bought 380 million books to the tune of 4.2 billion euros. But some have criticized the country's literary prizes as having an unfair bias.
These awards are decided on by jurors who are elected for life. Often they are part of these large publishers and are bound to reflect those interests. They themselves are aging authors and still want to be published. So finally we're left with an artificial creation that is not at all related to the quality of the book.
Prize-winning books often mean big business to publishers, the top three of which have dominated the award scene. Over the past 11 years, Gallimard has had 7 Goncourt winners. While some wonder if the playing field is level, Gallimard says they've earned their success.
It's quite logical considering the importance we at Gallimard put on literature, 300 new titles every year in our most prestigious Blanche collection throughout the entire world, plus all our other literary collections at Gallimard. It makes sense for us to be where we are.
The big French publishers shake off criticism that nothing changes year to year, shifting accountability to those who hand out the prizes.
It's not true that it's always the same. It is true that we are always there, but listen, ask the jurors what they think. They receive 400 books to read just for July. They are not going to read all 400.
French jurors are appointed for life, but some wonder if it wouldn't be more efficient to change the jurors each year.
Si vous pensez que le fait que des gens soient nommés de manière tournante.
It would be very difficult to prove that changing jurors would be better and less partial than having lifelong appointed ones. We could in fact take it in the opposite sense and say that jurors are practicing a profession because it is a job.
Hop the channel to London, and the Brits have a different take. Juries for the famous Man Booker Prize change every year. Organizers say anything less frequent would be unrealistic.
But actually they're reading them over about 7 or 8 months because proofs start coming in early. But that's still a very big task. And I find, therefore, that actually asking a group of judges to do it 1 year, it's probably too much to ask them to do it in 2 years running.
So change is not only allowed, but encouraged, bringing in people from different walks of life.
They're a mixture of people, and I always try and have somebody who comes from a different discipline altogether.
The idea is that the jury is more open and dynamic. But some jurors have raised eyebrows, such as the former head of MI5, Britain's intelligence agency.
Dame Stella Rimington is, of course, herself a published writer, so even though her background is not in publishing but in the security services, she nevertheless knows a good book when she sees one.
Changing juries may have led to the parity on top. Over the past 11 years, no publisher has won the Man Booker more than twice.
Okay, let's talk more about this now with Stephen Clark. He's the writer of a number of books that compare France with Britain, both fiction as well as non-fiction. You may have heard of A Year in the Murd, and his most recent book is called The Murd Factor. Welcome to the programme.
Thanks.
Now, what do you think? Is the race rigged in certain publishers' favour and certain writers' favour?
I don't know about writers, but in publishers, it's true that in France, if you're a writer, if you say to someone, I write books, especially in Paris, their first question is, who publishes you? Okay, they don't say, what sort of books do you write? They just want to know the name of your publisher, which counts for a lot because there are prestigious publishers and there are the rest.
So the general audience, they're a lot more aware of the existence of various publishers.
In the UK, people don't care. I mean, I bet you that no one in the UK knows who published the Booker Prize, Man Booker Prize winner. It's not something you ask. You just care about the book. In France, they care about the publisher a lot more because France is a very establishment-run country. Almost everything, especially in culture, is run by sort of little groups of usually old people, which is why French culture is a bit sort of sleepy and traditionalist, I find.
So you're not surprised to hear then that the jurors, when it comes to the Prix Goncourt, that they don't change, whereas in the UK they do change?
No, I mean, as it said in the report, I mean, how can these people read all these books? They don't read all the books. They just read a little selection. And apparently, you're elected to the committee for life, but you lose the power of the vote at 80. I mean, how many 80-year-olds can read that much print? I can't believe that their judgment of books is anything but an old person's judgment. Even if they're very experienced, they have their judgment is a lot more sort of old-fashioned than the general
doesn't
public.
That experience speak for something? We heard a clip there in this report. People saying, "Look, they're experienced. So what's the problem?" Oh,
sure, they're experienced, but it would be just like having a sort of an aged rock and roll guitarist judging a modern music competition. They don't know the whole stretch of culture. They don't know anything about new writing, particularly. They're very old-fashioned. Obviously they have great experience. They know their profession. They know the publishing business. But I just think inevitably, because they've been in it for so long, they must have sort of habitual ways of thinking. Whereas the Booker Prize, usually what they do is they go for provocation. They fling up some sort of book that no one's ever heard of, an author that no one's ever heard of, and it gets people talking about books in general. Whereas in France, I tend to think there's, if someone from outside the big publishers wins the Prix Goncourt, this French prize, the headline is "Small publisher wins book prize." They don't get them talking about books. It's just talking about publishers.
So it doesn't sound as if you have confidence in the Prix Goncourt, whereas perhaps you as a writer have confidence in the Man Booker Prize.
I mean, prizes to authors are hugely important. I was nominated for a British Book Award, which is another prize. It's hugely important. All writers want to win prizes. In France, I've spoken to other authors, and they have this kind of fatalistic approach. If I don't join one of the big publishers, I'm not going to win a prize, which is a sad thing to be thinking as an author.
Now, these awards, is it prestige or is it also the money factor behind the will to want to win these awards?
Well, it's both, obviously. French authors in general, apart from a few very big selling authors who aren't always with these big publishers, apart from a few big selling authors in France, book sales aren't that enormous unless you win a big prize. And so if they win the Prix Goncourt, they're set up for, they know they won't have to do anything else but write for at least 2 or 3 more books. So it's hugely important to them. People say that in France, book sales aren't that massive. So people will maybe buy the books that have won the big prizes and no others. So, if you're not winning a prize in France, you're in trouble.
What do you make of the argument then that some publishers are also making, which is that the best writers are drawn to the biggest publishing houses? It sounds almost like the footballers' market, that the richest clubs buy the best players. What do you make of that argument?
Well, that argument seems to suggest that young unknown authors have no chance, because a young unknown author might be with a young unknown publisher, might be a brilliant writer, but it sounds as if they're being excluded from the whole calculation. Maybe, well-established authors will go to big publishers, but what about all the new young writers?
Do they stand a chance, though, in this current climate?
Almost no chance, I think, of winning. It's going to stay, it's going to stay an establishment thing.
What do you think at this stage? What sells books? What factors does a book need in France as well as in Britain?
In France, it really needs a big prize, I think, or to be written by a famous established author. In the UK, obviously there are a few, famous authors whose books always sell every time they write a book. But in the UK, I think there's also you can capture the public imagination. You know, I had a book called 1,000 Years of Annoying the French, which, even though I say it myself, is a nice title, and British people love annoying the French, and that sort of captured the public's imagination and worked really well. I'm sure that almost nobody knows that the publisher was Random House. You know, an imprint of Random House. They just like the title. In the UK, I think you have more of a chance of that, especially with the Man Booker Prize. Sometimes they fling out this author you've never heard of with a sort of quirky little book, and everyone thinks, hey, yeah, I'll give that a try. In France, I think it's less the case. It's, you know, this is the book that the Goncourt says is good, therefore I will read it.
A lot of French people will probably say that's British arrogance.
British arrogance or British sort of quirkiness and, you know, willingness to try something new and different.
Talk us through a little bit, once again, what it means for an author to win an award. For instance, the Man Booker Prize. Are we talking of millions of euros? Are we talking of millions of dollars?
No, I don't think so. Not unless you sell a book for a film. No, the Booker Prize, the Man Booker Prize is funny in that sometimes you get these sort of, you know, new unknown authors who will have a Booker Prize winner, Man Booker Prize winner. They changed the name, and then when it will disappear because their other books won't be good. Sometimes they give it to an established author, like Julian Barnes, I think it was last year, who's written, you know, countless books, and that's just a kind of culmination of his career, a bit like winning an Oscar, you know. So it won't mean millions. It means good sales. In France, it means huge sales proportional to what they would have got. So obviously, it's, you know, it's the prestige and kind of, yes, I'm, you know, people like me as an author.
So is the Prix Goncourt more of a market mover than the Man Booker Prize?
I think so, yeah. But the Man Booker Prize in the UK, people think of it as a sort of slightly intellectual prize. People who aren't into literary fiction might think, oh, that's going to be a bit too clever for me, I might not read it. Whereas in France, the Goncourt, you know, book readers feel almost obliged to read it because it's what everyone talks about.
All right, Stephen Clark, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us here at France 24. And with that, we're going to wrap up the show. Thanks for watching to you at home.